Hello, I recently created a baby guide and people seem to very much enjoy it, so I'm going to follow it up with an overview of one of my personal favourite synergies, the Wild synergy. Wild is a little bit more complicated than types like, say, Fire or Ground, because it's a little bit more gimmicky, um, alongside the various stat boosts it provides. It's a very interesting gimmick, though, I will say. It makes for it's a very unique playing experience. It doesn't feel as you know equal to the other teams in terms of how you play. Um, for stats, they're just two pretty nice stats. To be fair, you get increased attack and you get increased movement speed, as well as a 25% chance for the wound effect to be applied. However, what makes Wild quite special is this. Basically, for every wild Pokemon you have on board, for every star of them, so 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, depending on the evolution, you get an added 1% chance to find wild in your shops and a 5% chance during PvE rounds. As such, this makes wild perfect for snowballing in the early and mid game, with you kind of get into a cycle of getting more evolutions, which means you have a higher chance of receiving more wild Pokemon, which means you are going to build a better team. It's a very fun and dynamic way to play the game. Wild also has a weather type called Blood Moon, as I will show you here, which increases physical damage by 20% and increases the duration of the previous aforementioned wound effect by 30%. As such, it's generally quite good. It also will um, transform Ursaluna into Ursaluna Blood Moon, which is a bit more of an offensive unit than big tanky regular Ursaluna, but it's very good. It does some very nice damage if you can get it sorted out. Um, so, for the early game, your goal is going to be to amass as many wild units as possible, ideally evolved, and even more ideally, you want your uncommons and you want your rares. As for the regionals, both Doduo and Braviary can be found in flying or wild areas, whereas Raticate is found in your dark areas. These regionals are usually the best sign for you to play a wild game, solely because a lot of the similar units this time, they're not great. Regular Rattata, not great. Regular Sphero and obviously Fearow, also not fantastic. Alolan Raticate, however, not too bad. It's the best of the commons at the very least. And Braviary is honestly a very strong, solid unit that will carry you through that. Well, not carry, but it'll very much be helpful for a lot of the time you play. One thing you can do is that while this bonus does include the Pokemon on your bench, so theoretically, if you wanted to, you could run a more viable team while you're sort of snowballing up this wild synergy, and then you could uh, sort of swap it around as you get to, say, Gyarados, so you can guarantee one of the uniques. One thing I will say is when I first started playing normal, I would often get distracted by trying to keep up the normal synergy that comes with a lot of the early units. You would think, okay, normal provides a bit of bulk to wild, which is a very hit fast, hit hard, kind of glass cannon sort of um, synergy. However, you will notice that a lot of these normal types they're just the worst wild units, pretty much. I mean, they're just so I don't know. It just doesn't work great, and it's something that's nice in the early rounds, but it's not something you want to hold on to. It's something that you should be very much willing to give up to for the sake of receiving some better units, especially your epics, because your epics are going to be very, very nice. Past T10 is when Wild starts to shine. Wild hits very hard in the mid game if you play it right. You need to be focusing on getting up your levels and getting as many evolutions as you can, setting up for basically dominating the mid game. You want to be putting lots and lots of pressure on the players who you are sort of versing. Potentially, make them trip up a bit, make them spend a bit more than they should. You want to look like a strong contender, basically. Um, you want the aim is that you want those teams that are very late game heavy to get sort of messed up by the fact that you are there. You want to end their sort of win streaks. You want to lower the money they're making as such. This way, you can sort of benefit from the fact that it's a very like I mean, it's as I mentioned before, it's a snowballing team. It's one that gets very, very good the more you add to it. As I said, the mid game is sort of where it shines. We'll talk uniques because we're on the topic of T10s. We'll talk uniques in a minute. But just first, I want to discuss potential secondary synergies you might want to run with Wild. Just to preface, pretty much, let's say 70% of the time, you want to be running Wild 9 because Wild 9 is just so good. You get that sort of plus 100% attack and move speed, which is insane. But you also get this, which is you enrage 5 seconds sooner. Now, if you don't know, when a round goes on for too long, um, all units get enraged, basically, which is they go all red. And it doubles damage, it doubles speed, it halves shield, healing, freeze, and sleep. Protect is removed. Um, basically, it's an anti-stall measure, basically. If you're playing a really, really stally team, then it sort of stops that from being too good. Wild gets to activate this 5 seconds sooner, which means if you are playing against big tanky teams, the Wild is going to be able to shred through them very quickly, especially in that sort of mid game, your early on your sort of the start of late game. It's going to be able to really shut those teams down because of this. But as I say that, there are certain synergies that do work quite well with Wild. My personal favourite is Dark. It's a pretty obvious one to sort of run alongside it. You've got multiple units. You've got Poochyena, you've got Alolan Rattata. You can't see it here, but you do have I think it's called Midnight, the red one, Lycanroc. Obviously, it works much better if you also have Absol. At this point, I believe you need to run at least one Duskstone, or two if you don't want to run Alolan Raticate for your whole game. Um, but it's not too bad. At the very least, you can very nicely slot in to Dark 3, which is, it synergizes very, very well with Wild. Again, it's that sort of hit fast, hit hard playstyle. Um, Otherwise, your secondary is going to very much depend on your unique, because the more little small synergies is what's going to happen. As you're kind of focusing on hitting Wild 9, you're not going to have that many situations where you're going to have, I don't know, I don't think there's any real situation where you're going to have Wild 9 and then another high synergy other than Dark. Um, so, yeah, instead, I would focus on trying to build around that unique and getting a small amount of extra synergy based off of them. Um, but in pretty much all cases, you do want to be prioritizing Wild 9. As you reach the late game, you want to heavily focus on levels, as I mentioned. Basically, when you're sort of fighting the tower duo, you pretty much want to be on the cusp of level 9. Levels is so important for keeping your team relevant as much as possible. Um, it as it's as it goes with legendaries. To be honest, your three options are three Pokemon who are very similar. Obviously, I mean, Entei and Raikou are pretty much bang on the same outside of their synergies. Suicune is similar, but the difference is it has lower PP requirements and it does special. I don't know, it doesn't. No, the only difference is PP. Ignore me. Yeah, the only difference is the PP requirement is going to be smaller. Um, Personally, I think Suicune is slightly better than the other two. However, the other two can be used potentially, especially Raikou, for synergies and stuff like that. So, speaking of, let's get back into the uniques. Your absolute best options, realistically, are, in my opinion, Absol, because it lets you go nicely into Dark. It also gets a bit of crit. Just a generally good unit. Zorora is, I find, very good because you can run it into Electric with, I believe, Raikou, and then usually I think a Thunderstone, just to get that extra synergy. Its ability is also just generally quite good. And I would argue potentially the best option, if you're not running a Dark team, is Pinsir. Pinsir obviously is a decent ability, I will say, but most importantly, Pinsir is a bug type, which means for your goal of dominating the mid game, it's going to be a lot easier if you have two of your unique, which can be done, I think, quite nicely with Spinarak. If you run these two together, you're going to have a very nice mid game, which is, as I said, where you sort of want to start putting on the pressure, snowballing, doing all that sort of stuff. Um, there's a couple good units. To be fair, most of them are okay. The other two that I would say are decent at the very least. Stantler is pretty good. It gives you field, which means you can run it into any of the legendaries with any other field type. I think Zigzag, yeah, but you can run it with Linoon. And Zangoose is also like pretty good. It's a bit more, I would say, situational than the others. If you've got a game with a lot of those sort of synergies that are going to be giving um statuses, especially if you're in, say, for whatever reason, a poison heavy lobby, Zangoose is going to absolutely excel. Um, but yeah, obviously that ability is not going to be as good in a lobby where there's not as much status usage. So to be fair, most synergies will do that sort of thing. The last two I haven't mentioned are Kangaskhan and Druddigon. The two different reasons. Kangaskhan is kind of just it's okay. It's a unit that sort of falls off quite quickly, and it does get outclassed by most of these other uniques, usually due to synergy, because again, with normal, it's nice, but you're going to be dropping those normal units very quickly, and as much as you can get fighting 2 with Daramaka, it's nothing particularly special. Druddigon, on the other hand, is, I would personally say, a very good unit. However, it just doesn't really synergize with Wild whatsoever. It's pretty much outclassed by all of the other um, sort of melee units in the group. It works well with Dragon, it works well with monster teams, but if you actually look through Wild, I don't believe a single other Wild type shares any of Druddigon's secondary synergies. There's not another Dragon type, and there's not another monster type. So it's just a lot harder to fit in, especially because, as I said, you kind of want to base your secondary synergy around your unique. Um, but yeah, as it goes, that is how to play the wild synergy. Um, I hope you enjoyed. I hope it explains it a little bit better for people who might be put off by the mechanics and the fact that it's full of seemingly shitty Pokemon, especially when for the type of people who are basing it off of sort of how good the team is in early game and continuing it the whole way through because it's got a pretty horrific early game. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe. Um, I hope to see you soon. Thank you.